Good morning. Hope everyone had a wonderful weekend and you're ready to get rolling this morning. So to lay the foundation for our conversation today, I wanted to do just a quick overview of what we've covered so far, because the thing we have to remember is while each one of these things that we're talking about is a fundamental, all of these fundamentals play together. So any professional athlete, they can't be just good at one of the fundamentals. They've got to have a handful of fundamentals that they're good at that are all playing into each other. So the same thing happens here. Everything we're talking about is just a piece of the puzzle. However, if we put all these puzzle pieces together, we've got a complete picture. So if you look back at this is savvyagent.biz/fundamentals. This is where you can go back and re-watch anything we've talked about. And it gives you a quick summary of the items and the topics for those weeks. So week one is we got some clarity on our CGI conversation, our career growth initiative conversation of understanding if we want to make X amount of money, we worked it backwards to understand how many closings we needed, how many contracts we needed, how many appointments we needed, all the way back to how many people we needed to be adding to our database to make that happen. Week two, we then focused on time blocking. This is something that a skill that all of us need to be better at, of understanding for us to reach our goal. We need to make sure that our calendar matches that goal. So going back, deconstructing our calendar and reconstructing our calendar in a way that matches our goal. Week number three, we talked about lead generation and specifically how to break down and make lead generation easier and take away the thought process of I don't know what I'm doing when I'm lead generating, or utilizing our lead generation time to get ready to lead generate. So we talked about that and got some clarity on how to better utilize our lead generation time blocking. Week four, last week, we talked about how to maximize our lead generation by really creating systematic follow-up using the 8x8s and the 33 touch in our CRM, and making sure that we have those in place, and how critical it is to have those in place to really capitalize on the follow-up, because it's not just lead generation, it's lead jello, which is lead generation mixed up with great follow-up. So today is going to stack onto this conversation. One of the things that I'll touch on real quickly before we jump into this conversation today is the concept of learning for learning's sake versus learning for doing sake. So here we are, we're rolling into week 5. The question I'd ask each one of you guys that have plugged into this and watched these fundamentals is, have you been plugging in and learning for learning's sake, or have you been plugging in and learning for doing sake? Meaning, have you taken specific action in relation to every one of these fundamentals in the week that we learned it and try to create a habit around it? So looking back at these items here, have you increased your grade on every one of these? So specifically with time blocking, have you taken some actions to better time block your calendar? Are you better utilizing your lead generation time? Are you now making an effort to utilize your CRM and systematically follow up with your people? So if you're not already doing those things, and you're obviously back to watch week number 5, you're finding value in the conversation. I would hope that you're implementing those, and it may not be perfect yet, but there's a process of implementation there. So here we are just finishing the first week of April. So April is 1/4 of the way done. Every Monday with my teams, I get together and we have what we call our wildly important goal meeting, which is our WIG meeting, and we go over our 4 conversations. So if you remember from week 1, we went over our 4 conversations and we put together our goals. This is a sample of goals I put together. And we'd go through and say, where are we in our 4 conversations? So I challenge you guys to do that today with your 4 conversations, to look at it and ask, okay, has any profit showed up in April? How about closings? Listings taken? How many listings have I taken so far in April? And how many appointments have I gone on? And the reason I'm coming back to this 4 conversation document is if we have not hit our goals in April, which it's only the first week of April, so the majority of us have not hit our goals for April. But if I was looking at this and saying, all right, as for using it as an example here, if I was looking at this saying, okay, I've created 0 profit so far in April, I've had 0 closings, I've had 0 listings taken and 0 listing appointments. If that was the reality for me on April 9th, 1 quarter into the month, I'd look at this and say, okay, well, I still have 3 weeks left of the month to close this gap. So I'm going to obviously focus on the first conversation here. It does me no good at this point in the game to focus on the profit piece of this because I need the appointments. I need people to talk to. I need to take listings. So the tool that we're going to talk about today, the fundamental tool that we're going to talk about today is the pipeline tool, because that is exactly where I'd be able to go at this point to say, how am I going to close this gap? How am I going to create the listings taken that I need in April? Who am I going to talk to? Who are the people most likely to sign a contract with me in this month to make me hit my goal of 2 listings taken in the month of April? So if you look back and remember the, let's see here, right here, the CGI tools and the way they flood into each other, one of these tools is the pipeline tool. So if you go to the Career Growth Initiative, KW Connect, go under the Growth tab to Career Growth Initiative. Underneath here, you can see this is, remember, this is, we talked about this in the first week. This is where you implement your appointments and so forth. But down below here, you have the ability then to download the pipeline tool. And I'm going to show you the pipeline tool today in 2 different formats. Let me start with this one. So this is the pipeline tool, exactly how it's downloaded from KW Connect. Now, this is a great tool. I'm going to show you a couple modifications that I've made to it that I think are going to make it a little bit more user-friendly. But again, the key here is to utilize a pipeline. Now, remember, it's not your CRM or a pipeline, it's your CRM and a pipeline. Because the way to make a pipeline a powerful tool is to only have people on your pipeline that are actually progressing towards a contract, or that you have on your radar of someone that has a need within the next several months. The people that do not belong on your pipeline are people that you're going to be following up with over the next several months, 6+ months, because they maybe will need you at some point. Those people go on into your CRM and your drip campaigns, and depending on whether they're an A+, A, B, C, is depending how often you're following up with them. The idea with the pipeline is to keep this very clear. It's a tactical sheet of who is most likely to give me business within the next several months. So you can see, I'm going to just quickly review the one provided by KWRI, and then I'm going to show you a couple modifications I've made to it. If you want to utilize this one, you can download it directly from KW Connect. If you want to utilize the one that I've made some modifications to today, then I'm going to have that included on the savvyagent.biz/fundamentals. Underneath this video, you can click on that and download the one with the modifications. So you can see on the pipeline tool, it's got a listings tab, and a buyers tab. So you can separate who you're talking to that is a potential seller or a potential buyer. Now, the nice thing about this is it has an appointment date, address, name, contact information, next step, notes, and then a rating system. Now, all those things are important, but the one that I modified has a couple more columns in that I think are important. So this is the one that I've modified, and I've switched the ordering of things on it. So you can see here on the listing pipeline, we still have the name, but now to me the name is the first thing we're gonna get from this person. Contact information. The goal is to get an appointment, right? So I want to get an appointment with that person. What is the address? I also want to track what is the lead source, because one of the things we've talked about in our lead generation fundamental is depending on the lead source may depend on what is the likelihood of me getting the contract. I may have a higher likelihood of getting the contract if that lead source is a referral for my SOI other than a web lead. So I want to be able to have a quick snapshot of where did that lead source come from. The other one I added here is, did I start a drip campaign? Is this person currently running on a drip campaign? Because I want to know for certain that which drip campaign and which touches they're going to get. So when I am reaching out to have additional follow-up conversations, I can make reference to the drip campaign and the value that's being sent to them systematically. Next step here is I can type in, what is my next course of action? Any notes that I think is relevant to that contact, and then the rating. Now, the thing I like about the rating here is if we put in, it's rated on a scale of 1 to 10. And the way that I recommend using this is exactly how KWRI trains on the pipeline tool, is a 10 is somebody that's looking to make a move within the next 30 days, the next 1 month. 9 is within the next 2 months, 8 is within the next 3 months, and so on and so forth. But say I had several contacts in here, and I had them ranked at 10, 4, 8, 6, at any time, and people will vary. Like 1 week, someone could be in here at 10, and then someone could come up and they're like, hey, you know what, actually, we're going to put this on the back burner for 2 months. And say this 6 or this 10 changed to a 9. I could come in here and change it, and then I could just run by sort, this button here, and it's going to reorder all of these in order of importance of who's most likely to be next to sign a contract with me, who has the quickest need out of all of these people, okay? So say this person here to a 6 calls up and say, hey, we have some urgency now. They become a 10. If I resort now, well, let's see, they should be rolling up to the 10. I'll make sure the equation here is working correctly on the way up. You can see off before I post it to the website, but you can see off to the right here it numbers how many people that you have by ranking. So you can see you can have this by the listing, and then you can have this also by the buyer. So you do the same thing for your buyers here. You put them in here exactly the same way. There's the same columns, and you rate them, and then sort them by their rating. Now, that seems pretty simple, but let me talk through a couple things. How do people get onto your pipeline? Because there's a couple different ways that people are going to end up on your pipeline tool. Now, the best way that people are ending up on your pipeline, because the highest probability of closing are those people that have already given you permission. If you remember our graph of people that we don't know, gave us permission, came into our database, and we're systematically following up with them. Now, the more people we have inside of our database that are getting that systematic follow-up, and we're nurturing that relationship and building that relationship, somewhere along the path there, they're going to raise their hand and say, hey, I do have a need. Thanks for all that information you've given me over the past 24 months or 18 months or whatever it is. I do have a need now. Now, as soon as they raise their hand and say, I have a need, and they engage in that conversation of, I need to engage you to help me accomplish this. I have a problem. I need you to solve it. At that point, that person goes on to your pipeline because they've raised their hand from all the other value you've given them to say, I have a current need. That person would go onto your pipeline. Say someone reached out and said, okay, I am going to list my house, and say their name is Josh Johnson. Contact information, I put them in here. So I'd set up an appointment date whenever I'm going to go meet them so I can keep track of when I'm meeting them. Put in their address. This is my SOI. They're currently on my 33 touch. And then I'm going to start them on 8x8 seller because they just said that they want more education on being a lister in today's market. My next step is prepare listing presentation. And then whatever notes I want to put in here. And now they said, hey, we're probably 2 months out. I'm going to switch them to an 8 and have them on here. So that's one way that's the best way that someone's going to end up on your pipeline, because if they raise their hand for my SOI and said, hey, I'm ready, we need to have a conversation, my likelihood of getting that person across the finish line is very, very high. The other ways that people get onto your pipeline report could potentially be, they could potentially get onto your pipeline report before they even get into your CRM. Now, that's the trick here, is they could either come back from your CRM onto your pipeline, or you may connect with somebody first and put them on the pipeline before they even get into the CRM. An example of this would be if someone from my SOI called me and said, hey, I was at a family party this weekend, my aunt's looking to sell, I told her all about you, and she's going to be moving in the next couple months, I need you to give her a
Great.
call. Well, at that point, let me see if I got someone here that I can mute. Someone's making some noise. Let's try this one. At that point, we want to make sure that we get them on the pipeline because we're targeting them. But I don't have all the information yet to put them on a drip campaign. And even if I did, even if they said, hey, here's her email address, here's her phone number, I am not going to just randomly drip on this person because that's going to immediately tarnish the relationship before I had a chance to connect with them. Okay? So here I'd put in Susan, whatever contact information I did have. I don't have an appointment date set yet. I don't have an address yet because they just told me about her. Lead source, referral. And then I don't have her on a drip campaign yet because we haven't had a conversation. And call to meet. So is my next step. She told me that she's probably 3 months out, so I'm going to put that as a 7. And now I know this becomes a game. I need to fill in the rest of the information because the more information I have on here, the higher the likelihood it is that I'm going to close that into a contract. So now Susan becomes a contact for me. Now, when I do make the contact with her and I do have a good conversation with her, remember my 2 primary objectives in those conversations is number 1, set up an appointment. Number 2, get permission to follow up. So if she's saying that she does have a listing need, I'm going to say, oh, great, awesome. I'm looking forward to our meeting that we just set up on 4/19/18. And by the way, I'm just going to send you over some information beforehand to help educate you on the selling process before we meet. What's your email address? I'll get her email address and put it in here. And then I'm going to say, awesome, I'm going to start you on the 8x8 seller campaign. Okay, so that way I have them all in here. And then this person goes into my CRM immediately because I just had the conversation, I got permission. Now they belong in my CRM as well as my pipeline report. So those are a couple ideas. If I meet someone at an open house, same thing. They're going to go on here at the same time they go onto into my CRM. Now, that's how people get onto the pipeline, but it's just as important to clean out your pipeline as it is to add people to your pipeline. Because if I had 100 people on this list because I've had conversations with 100 people over the last several months about listing their homes, now the ones that are really, really on fire, those really hot leads now become lost in the mix of all these other leads because I'm optimistically leaving them on my pipeline. Now, I love that we're in an industry where the majority of us are very optimistic people, but sometimes our optimism comes back to bite us in the butt because we are diluting our leads on the pipeline by only keeping the people that are really engaged in the conversation on the pipeline. So let's say Susan, I have an incredible conversation with her. We're progressing down that path. We're having great conversations. I went and had a great listing appointment with her. She says, great, I'm going to use you. We just have to make sure the job transfer comes through before we sign any paperwork, blah, blah, blah. So say at some point we keep having that conversation. She starts to go cold. And then all of a sudden she's like, hey, you know what? We don't even know if the job transfer is coming in anymore. It could be a year from now or whatever it is. We want to use you when it's time, but we don't know when that time is. I'm going to keep her on the list for maybe a month or 2 until she verifies that, hey, we have no clue when this is going to happen. At that point, I'm going to take Susan off the pipeline report, and I'm going to let my CRM do the work. The reason most people leave them on the pipeline report and don't shift them over to the CRM is because they don't have confidence that their CRM is going to do its job of following up on a regular basis. And if you didn't set up your CRM appropriately, it won't do that job. But if we have the 33 touch and the 8x8 campaign in there, then we know that it's going to do its job. And at some point, they're going to re-raise their hand to say, hey, it's time for me to go back on your pipeline report. So what I would do with Susan, if that was the conversation, is I'd come in here, I'd take Susan off of my pipeline report, I'd go back into my CRM, and I'd create myself a reminder 6 months from now. Hey, call Susan and see where they're at with the job transfer and see if they belong back on the pipeline. So I'd make myself a note. That way, I don't have to think about Susan again unless Susan raises her hand or my CRM says, hey, Marcus, it's time to call Susan again, see where she's at. And me not having to think about Susan for 6 months, guess what that gives me the ability to do? I now get to focus more of my effort on the people that are on my pipeline that are more likely to close, more likely to sign a contract with me. If Susan and several other Susans are on my pipeline report, I may ignore Josh because I've got so many people on this list that I can't follow up appropriately with all of them with the intention of getting them across the finish line. And I might finally get around to calling Josh and be like, Josh, it's me again. I know it's been 2 weeks, but I'm excited about listing your house. And he'll be like, hey, sorry, you kind of disappeared. And my neighbor actually knocked on my door and told me he was a real estate agent. And I actually just listed with him. I signed last night. Worst call ever. But we've all been there. So that is the trick with having a pipeline that we're looking at every single day and asking ourselves the question, who is it that is most likely to get across the finish line? And if we look at our pipeline, if we're looking at our 4 conversations, and we're saying, awesome, okay, I need 2 listing appointments to take 2 listings by the end of the month. Here we are, the 9th of April. Okay, first place I'm going to go is I'm going to go to my pipeline tool. I'm going to look at, not this pipeline tool, I'm going to look at the other pipeline tool right here. If this was my actual pipeline tool for April, I would look at this and say, okay, well, I need 2 listings and 2 listing appointments. And let's say that Susan really is not till 5/15, 9/18. Okay, so she's a month out before I get to go meet with her. So I'd look at this and say, okay, if I know that I've got to hit 2 listing appointments, and on my pipeline report, I've only got 1 appointment scheduled right now, I need to go find more people to put on my pipeline. So now this becomes a game to say, okay, my pipeline does not match my goals. My calendar matches my goals, but my pipeline does not. What does that trigger me to need to go do? Increase my lead generation, okay? So I need to make sure that I can capitalize on my lead generation time. And if I come up to an appointment in my calendar that I don't have already scheduled for an appointment, guess what I got to use that appointment time for? Additional lead generation. Because a healthy pipeline tool, enough people on your pipeline would mean that when you're looking at your 4 conversations, it's an easy conversation to say, awesome, 2 listing appointments. I know exactly where those are going to come from. Because from my pipeline tool, I know I've been in conversation with these people for several months. And right now, Sam, the seller, I've been talking to for 3 months. He told me April's the month. So we're going to go close that deal this month. Whatever that is, the pipeline tool is going to drive that. And we need to be looking at our pipeline tool daily. So here is the challenge for today. And then we're going to open it up for any questions people have on how to utilize this tool. The challenge for today is this. Number 1, quickly go back for the previous 4 weeks and give yourself a grade. How are you doing? Because the truth is you're not going to have confidence in the pipeline tool if your CRM is not set up to do the follow-up it's intended to do, so that you can focus on the pipeline tool. So give yourself a grade on all 4 weeks up to this point and ask yourselves the question, what needs to happen today for my calendar to match my CGI, my lead generation to be better time, my lead generation time to be better spent, and my CRM to be set up to do what it's intended to do and systematically follow up with my people and nurture those relationships. And then lastly, download this pipeline report and get everybody you're in conversation with on either a listing side or a buyer side onto the pipeline and rate them realistically. Put your optimism on the side for a minute and ask yourself the real question, like, realistically, where am I with these people? What are the chances of me getting them across the finish line? And when is that going to happen? And if you don't know, I'd have the conversation with them. Say with Susan Seller here, I didn't know, we had a great conversation, but I didn't know her timeline. I would make it a point to call her and say, hey, Susan, it's Marcus. I'm just following up real quickly. Hey, I was going through my list of people that I'm going to be taking care of over the next several months, making sure that I've got everyone on my calendar, that I'm going to knock it out of the park for them. And one of the things that I didn't get clarity on in our last conversation is how many months you're out until you feel like you're going to be ready to list your house. Could you help me understand that so I could be best ready to serve you at that time? Awesome. 2 months? Perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put together a game plan of follow-up for you over the next 2 months to make sure you have all the information you need so we're ready to hit the market in May and crush it. Okay? Awesome. Okay? So it's real, we need to get an idea of where people are at, and then it becomes fun because we can look at our pipeline report and say, okay, if we're consistently needing 2 listing appointments a month, we can look at our pipeline report and say, okay, well, we already know where some of those listing appointments are going to come from. Now let's go find the rest. Let's get serious about our lead generation, and let's go stack up our pipeline with these conversations of people that are going to be happening over the next 6 months. Realistically, for me, probably no one should be on your listing or buyer pipeline report that's farther than 6 months out. Now, you're going to have to create your own standard and rule around that. But realistically, if they're more than 6 months out, more than likely, in my opinion, they belong in your CRM with some really specific reminders of follow-up there, where I want to focus on people that are going to need me in the next 6 months that I'm really engaging right now and going for the contract. So that is the power of the pipeline tool. And you can see now how they tie together and how they feed one another, and how one tool in isolation, standing on its own, may be powerful, but not near as powerful as if the other tools and fundamentals are intact and in place and systematized. So that is the challenge for today. Let's open it up for any questions that you guys might have in regards to the pipeline tool or anything else you guys want to talk about. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Awesome. Any questions for me?
Hey, so Marcus, on the 4 conversations chart,
yep.
Do buyers count as listings there?
Great question. So if we go back to the 4 conversations, let me share it again real quick so I can walk through this. So ideally, the 4 conversations are set up in a way that we want to be listings focused. Now, depending on the agent and what their goals are, sometimes I'll change this from listings taken to contracts taken. An example of this is if I had an agent that their whole goal this year was 12 transactions, 1 transaction a month. In the end, for them, it doesn't really matter if it's a buyer or a seller that they're representing. So I would come in here, and when we put together their CGI, I'd switch this to say contracts taken instead of listings taken. Now, if I'm dealing with a mega agent or an agent that's saying, hey, you know what, my goal is 4 transactions a month. I want to do 48 transactions this year. Well, I know they've got the same amount of time in a day than someone that's going to do 12 transactions, right? The trick is they need to better leverage themselves, and their dollar per hour productivity is going to be better spent on listings than it is a buyer. So I need that person focused on taking listings with the understanding that if they have a great listing process in place, the buyers are going to show up. So if it's a balanced 50-50 between listings and buyers, we'd say, okay, well, if your goal is 48 closings in the year, then your listings taken your listings sold only need to be 24, which is half. Your listings taken probably needs to be close to 30, meaning that 6 of them are going to fall out, or whatever it is, whatever that math is. And then I'd say, let's focus on the listings with confidence that the buyers are going to show up. But someone that's going to do 12, I need to just track contracts, which is both listing agreements and buyer agency agreements. One last comment on this would be if you're a mega agent and you're holding your team accountable to 4 conversations and you have strictly a buyer's agent on your team, then I would change this to buyer agency agreements taken, because that is the focus for a buyer's agent, is to take buyer agency agreements. Does that make sense?
Yes.
The idea of the 4 conversations is the same, but ideally we want to focus on listings. Great question. What other questions do you have for me? See, we got a chat come in. Just want to make sure this isn't. Does a buyer broker count as a listing? Oh, that was from you, Scott. Double question. The written question and the verbal question. Okay, awesome. Well, if there's no other questions for me, appreciate you guys being on. I really enjoy this first 30 minutes of my week to kick it off with some energy and some focus on the fundamentals. Encourage you guys to plug in. One quick note is there is no fundamentals call next week. I'm going to be out of the country. So we're 2 weeks from today. That gives you 2 weeks to make sure you got all these things cranking and plugging away in your world. And we'll see you back here in 2 weeks. Thanks for being on the call.